Hello there. The British Prime Minister must make a dramatic course correction. In the BBC interview, Liz Truss apologizes, but still wants to stay in office. British Prime Minister Liz Truss has apologized for the turbulence caused by her economic policy. I want to take responsibility and apologize for the mistakes that have been made, is what Truss said in the BBC interview. Huge tax cuts announced by her government, the financing of which remained unclear, had sent the British pound plummeting and interest rates skyrocketing. She admitted that the government had gone too far too quickly. I heard that before. Truss was forced to sack her ally and Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, and replace him with veteran pragmatist Jeremy Hunt. On Monday, he announced a 180-degree turnaround in economic policy. Almost nothing remains of Truss' core promise. Even the duration of the state energy price cap was reduced from 2 years to 6 months. Truss emphasized in the interview that economic stability had been restored. With a view to her political future, the head of government was optimistic. I will lead the Conservative Party in the next election, said Truss. Yeah, my ass. Just a month and a half after taking office, the British Prime Minister is facing the shambles of her politics. The leader of the Conservatives has only been in office since the beginning of September. First party colleagues are publicly calling for a resignation. The discussion about possible successors or new elections has picked up some speed now. The fierce reaction of the financial markets to the Truss government's tax package around 2 weeks ago reflects the market's considerable distrust of Great Britain's economic performance. The attempt to calm the markets by replacing the Chancellor of the Exchequer and a hectic tax policy U-turn does nothing to change the finding of a mixed economic balance sheet in recent years. This weakness should not be attributed solely to Brexit, but one can also state that Brexit has not been a success story so far. And this may not only be a sobering message for Tories, and you will hear much more about this tonight in my last video. The most recent experiences should also have a sobering effect on those economists who give the wrong impression that the state budget restrictions, which are well known from textbooks, do not even exist. It's said that a state that borrows in its own currency cannot become insolvent. However, the announcement of tax cuts to be financed by new debt caused the currency to depreciate sharply and bond yields to rise so much that heavily indebted pension funds ran into trouble and the Bank of England had to calm the markets. This debacle really cannot serve as a model. Instead, sustainability of government debt creates fiscal leeway. The Bank of England has fared better than the government. Their decision to temporarily buy government bonds to stabilize the financial markets is due to the fact that, given the size of the financial market, it is hard to dispute that a central bank can hardly refuse to act as a kind of insurer against major macroeconomic risks and serious crises. However, by strictly limiting these interventions, the Bank of England has resisted strong pressure from the financial markets and the government to make itself their complaint bailiff on a permanent basis. Other central banks are welcome to take this decisive action as an example. Liz Truss' reign is already record-breaking. In this time of 6 weeks, the Prime Minister has lost the trust of the financial markets, alienated her own party, and lost public respect. The tabloid Daily Star questioned whether the Prime Minister would have a longer shelf life than a lettuce, which dies in about 10 days. Truss lost control of her government long ago. Things started to get out of hand after her Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, unveiled his mini-budget on September 23rd. The hefty tax cuts, not least for high earners, frightened the financial markets so much that the pound fell to its lowest value in decades. And so the big U-turn came on Friday. Truss fired her Chancellor of the Exchequer and ideological companion Kwasi Kwarteng and appointed Jeremy Hunt to office instead. With the step, she admitted that her entire program with which she had started as head of government was unsuitable. On Monday morning, the new finance minister issued an emergency statement in which he finally buried Truss' economic policy plans. I will talk about this at noon a bit more. We will reverse almost all the fiscal policy measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago, Hunt said. And actually, his intervention was planned 2 weeks later. But the short-term advance shows how big the panic is in Downing Street. One of the core responsibilities of any government is economic stability, Hunt said. His measures, the Treasury said, would deliver £32 billion in savings a year compared to Kwarteng's plan. Hunt also promised major cuts in public spending. The markets reacted as hoped. The pound strengthened and interest rates on British government bonds fell. The U-turn is a total disgrace for Liz Truss. In principle, she has handed over control of her government's economic policy direction to her finance minister, and she has become a lame duck already. Only a handful of Tories have publicly called for Liz Truss' resignation, but the mood within the party is what we would say in German, in the basement. You can write her off, is what an anonymous former cabinet member told the BBC. And behind the scenes, ways of bringing about a change of government are already being played out. One often hears the name Rishi Sunak. The Chancellor of the Exchequer under Boris Johnson is being discussed as a kind of transitional Prime Minister. And Secretary of Defense Ben Wallace is also being considered a candidate. And if you think about this, both are not politically where Liz Truss is in this extreme. With Rishi Sunak always announced that he wouldn't do tax cuts until the inflation is down, and he would have been right with that point. There's a lot that's going wrong in all the manifestos in the Tories at the moment, but there he would have done a far better job than Liz Truss. And Ben Wallace, as far as I get it, he is either no extreme right-winger in the Tory party, as many of the current government are. And the people in the base are that brought Truss where she is. Because we must remember one thing. In the leadership contest in Parliament, Truss was not in first place. That was Rishi Sunak. And whatever criticism you can have about Rishi Sunak, I have a lot of that. But he definitely is not a Liz Truss. And so the people in the Tory party will have to think about what they want to do at the moment. But as I mentioned yesterday, the most reasonable way for a party in such a crisis would be to give the gift to Labour of new elections, being kicked out of government. I know a lot of people would lose their jobs in Parliament, but still take the big beating, build up the party from within, come back to their senses, and come back to in the next election with a proper new manifesto, with a proper new team, and a realistic policy. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.